Hello, History Seminarians, and welcome to day 13. So this is week 7. Fairly short video today. I'm sure I've lost most of my seniors, and I'm okay with that. I accept that. But a few of you may still be checking in just because. I just want you to know I appreciate that. I hope you all had an enjoyable Memorial Day weekend. I'm going to post this probably Monday morning on Memorial Day, but certainly I don't expect that you act on it until Tuesday. Enjoy your Memorial Day. I'm only covering one Roman numeral, that's Roman numeral 7, the Potsdam post-war plan, the Potsdam meeting. And the reason I want to point that meeting out is because it's so different from all the meetings that have occurred between the leaders of the Allies up to this point. The only key player that is at the Potsdam meeting that has been to all the other meetings is Stalin. And Stalin sees the world in a very different way than the rest of the Allies do. He sees the rest of the countries reluctantly helping him to defeat the Nazis, but not necessarily liking him. He's necessary, but not convenient, I guess you could say. He's well aware that he's kind of the black sheep of the Allies, if you want to call it that. In July of 1945, the Germans have surrendered. They meet in Potsdam. And of course, Truman's there instead of Roosevelt, who's died in April. And Clement Attlee is there to represent the British. What's happened to Winston Churchill? He's still alive. But Winston has been making so much of a fuss about the growing, looming threat of the Russians and how you can't trust Stalin, that the people of England, the United Kingdom, basically said, Winston, time out. We got to let you go, brother, because you're just going to drag us into another war. Turns out he was right. Churchill will, a year or so later, be right back in power again once they realize there's a new war called the Cold War, and Churchill was right about Stalin, and we never should have trusted him. But that's all down the road. At this point, Clement Attlee and President Harry Truman arrive to, hold on a second, yeah. They arrive at Potsdam just basically to say, how do we wrap this up with the Japanese, more or less? And Stalin he doesn't trust either one of them. He's got a perfectly good reason to not trust any of them. He knows the Americans are working on a plan for the atomic bomb. He knows the Americans will probably use it. What Truman keeps telling him is, what bomb? What plan? I don't know what you're talking about. Well, he's about to find out, but that's for Wednesday. Stalin will go along with whatever the Allies say. He doesn't like Truman. He knows Truman doesn't like him. But in the back of Stalin's mind, he's got to look out for number one, and that's him and the Soviet Union. Their plan is, take as much territory as you can, hold on to it, make it a buffer zone or safety zone around the Soviet Union, and then never leave. Make all those little areas that you control outside your own country into satellite countries that must trade with you and rely on you and depend on you, force them to become communist, and then never give them back. If the people of the world won't vote to become communist on their own, there is no world communist revolution, then you kind of have to force it along. And that's really what what Stalin was scheming to do. Truman doesn't trust Stalin at all, knows he's up to something tricky, and only finds out about the planning, the Manhattan Project and the planning for the atomic bomb once he's become president. And as the looming plan for the invasion of Japan takes shape, and he gets his weekly briefings on what that will mean, if Iwo Jima and Okinawa are any example of how things will be, they brief Harry that he could expect that the war will end in 1947, when the islands of Japan are completely taken over and the Japanese population more or less annihilated, because they will follow their orders of their emperor and fight to the last middle school student if they have to. The Americans have watched this happen in Iwo Jima. They've watched this happen in Okinawa, especially. Atrocities occurring where the Japanese would literally herd civilians in front of their troops to act as meat shields for the Japanese army, knowing that American soldiers, having morals and scruples, would hesitate to open fire on women and children. The Japanese used their own women and children as a shield. The kamikazes, the human torpedoes, the kaitens, flying bombs, everything the Japanese have been dreaming up, looked like the worst case nightmare for the Americans if they were going to have to actually invade the islands of Japan to get the Japanese to surrender. And this was really messing with the Americans. They realized that by the time Okinawa had ended in June of 1945, the campaign had ended, they had as many casualties from mental combat stress issues as they did from physical wounds, because this was such a culturally in-your-face traumatizing thing to basically feel like you have to wipe out an entire group of human beings in order to beat them. It was messing with a lot of Marines, that's for sure. And so when the idea comes along, hey, you don't have to invade Japan, you could drop this bomb, and maybe the Japanese will surrender. Truman goes for that. Also because if he's able to convince the Japanese that he has an endless supply of these bombs, the Japanese would surrender in 1945 instead of 2 years later, with an estimate of 250,000 more American lives lost. That's 250,000. So, because he doesn't want all those casualties and because he wants the war over now, Truman votes, let's go with the bomb. Now, they had only tested one bomb, and that was at Los Alamos, at a place called White Sands specifically. They tested the bomb. You can see video clips of this on YouTube. And when the scientists were talking about this, very interesting, they said, when you set this thing off, what's going to happen? And they said, well, we really don't know. We might blow a hole in the atmosphere and destroy the atmosphere of planet Earth and kill everyone on the planet. That might happen. Let's call that worst case scenario. But it might just be a minimum explosion, kind of like a blip, and there's just a split second of atmosphere disruption, and then the blast itself will radiate outward, and one bomb, one plane at risk, but it acts like hundreds of planes dropping thousands of bombs. They tested it out, and what do you know, it worked. And immediately they made plans to develop several different versions of the bomb and drop them one after another on Japan. Now, a lot of people don't realize this. Truman actually contacted the Japanese and said, listen, we have a weapon and we're going to use it. You need to surrender right now. The Japanese response was, yeah, we'll believe it when we see it. And so, in August of 1945, as all of the weapons and men and women and ships and aircraft and barge after barge of ammunition piled up in preparation for the invasion of Japan, they went ahead and decided to prove Japan that they could do this. Now, they only had 2 bombs ready to go, and they had to load the parts on ships. You may have heard the story of the USS Indianapolis, delivered the parts, top secret mission, to the island of Tinian. So top secret, nobody knew that they were at sea. After they delivered the bomb parts and headed back to the United States, they were torpedoed by a Japanese submarine. No one came to save them. Hundreds of men were eaten by sharks in the water before someone finally came to rescue somebody. And this even shows up in the movie Jaws. Quinn, the fishing boat captain, is a survivor of the USS Indianapolis. So, some of you may have had relatives that were involved in this big buildup, and we're very thankful that it never happened. When we get together on Wednesday, we'll talk about the dropping of a bomb on Hiroshima and then the second bomb on Nagasaki and how the Japanese surrendered and the war came to an end. But we're almost at 10 minutes, so I'm going to let it go right there. So have a great Memorial Day. I hope you all do something to remember veterans, especially World War II veterans. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you again Wednesday or last day. Bye-bye.